Okay. Portion Bereishis, Pasuk Beis. Oretz hoisa so vavo. The earth was tohu vavo. Rashi says the word tohu means desolate, to the point that it was a level of desolation, like you're taken aback. It was like on a chaotic level. V'choshech al pnei tohu. There was darkness over the deep water. Ruach Elokim, and the spirit of Hashem, Rachev Sapnei Amoyim, was hovering over the water. So what was the state of affairs at this moment? The earth was unformed. There was darkness, meaning there were no luminaries. The world was covered with water, and the spirit of Hashem was hovering over that water. So the Chazal, the Midrash, explains that when the Torah is being so specific and explaining the state of affairs of development, to what degree was it the first day before God said, let there be light? It says, tohu, vo, darkness, deep water, tom. So there's a Yalkut, which is a compilation of Midrash, tells us that each one of these words alludes to the future exiles of the Jewish people. Tohu is referring to the exile, the Babylonian exile. Vo is referring to the Persian and Medes. That's Paras HaModai. Choshech, darkness, as we're going to show in a moment why these words allude to each one of these exiles. Darkness is the Greek exile. Tahom means the deep waters. Tom means endlessly deep. It's referring to the Edomite exile. So the Midrash explains Reish Lakish Posach. Reish Lakish began lecturing. Posach Kario B'Malchus. He interpreted the Posuk. It's referring to the kingdoms. Ha'oretz hoisa so. When the Torah tells us the land was tohu, the earth was tohu, Bavel. It's referring to the Babylonian exile. Why? Because the Navi says, Ra'isis oretz di tohu. I saw the land that was tohu. Tohu means it was desolate. Vo, what's vo? Ze Haman. It's alluding to Haman. Haman Arosho. Dechsiv ve'avilu loves Haman. We find that he was rushed to the party that Esther had made for Achashverosh by Avilu. It was like he was overwhelmed, bewildered. The Choshech ze Yovan. Choshech is referring to the Greeks. Why is Greece identified as darkness? Because they blackened the eyes of the Jews with their decrees. They had very extreme decrees. You were not permitted to circumcise yourself. Jews, they were not permitted to study Torah. They're not permitted to observe the Shabbos, and they were not permitted to sanctify the new moon. These were the decrees of the Greeks. They wanted to Hellenize the Jews, that they should accept, embrace whatever they believed in. And why? What were one of the decrees? Listen to this. Shois Omeres Lahem. One of the decrees was Kisu al Keren Hashor. Shein lo lochem chelik belokei Yisrael. Right on the horn of an ox, that you have no share in the God of Israel. That means every Jewish home had to have this type of plaque, an ox horn, and on the ox horn it was inscribed, Ein lochem, ein lanu chelik belokei Yisrael. We have no share in the God of Israel, which we'll discuss in a moment. Why would have been enough just put up a plaque? Why the horn? Why the horn of an ox? Al Pnei Sehom says the Ruach Elokim, the Spirit of God, was hovering over the deep waters. This is before. Zumalchus Harishah. This is the evil kingdom. Shein lo cheker ketom. It's endless. Just at the depth of the ocean, it's endless. It's unending. The exile, the Edomite exile, is unending. She'ein lo cheker. Ruach Elokim, the Spirit of Hashem, Meracheves Zerucho Shel Mashiach. The Spirit of Elokim, that's the Spirit of Mashiach. Dichsiv, V'noch ol of Ruach Hashem. The Spirit of Hashem will dwell upon the Mashiach. He'll be a prophet, and ultimately he'll bring the world to do tshuva. And what merit will Mashiach come? B'schus tshuva. And the merit of tshuva, tshuva is equated to water. Shenemar shivchi kamayim libech. Poskim echo, that your heart will gush forth with water. So we find the Torah opening statement of the Torah describing the beginning of creation. It's alluding to the four exiles, the four kingdoms. And what is the ultimate culmination of existence? Ruach Elokim, the Spirit of Hashem, which is Ruach Hashem Mashiach, Rachav Sal Pnei Hamayim. Hovering over the water, which when will it come? What will bring Mashiach? What's equated to water, which is tshuva. Tshuva is Nimshelis Kamayim. Because Yirmiyah Hanavi says in Eicha, Shivchi Kamayim Libech. Your heart will gush forth with water. Before we start talking about the four exiles, each one, how they're depicted, it seems to be, for instance, what a pre-existent existence. We speak about creation is ex nihilo. So is it possible in any way to imagine or to speculate was pre-existence? It's not possible. We say, well, pre-existence, it was a vacuum. But even vacuum, void, whatever you want to depict it as, whatever you want to visualize, that visualization is part of creation. That's creation. So therefore, the only reason why the deficiencies or the counterbalance to good can exist, as it does exist, Babylonians destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. They exiled the Jews. For whatever reason, why we deserve to be exiled. In that exile, we were subject to Haman, which we were nearly annihilated. And then, during the second temple period, we were overtaken by the Greeks at a certain period. That was Hanukkah time. And they had decrees. And ultimately, the closing exile is Edom. That's Esav Soni Yaakov, which is the ultimate counterbalance to spirituality. This is Esav versus Yaakov. Yaakov is a representation of all the good in existence, who addresses and meets the objective of creation, which is Torah, which is the Jewish people, and Esav is the counterbalance to try to destroy that. That's Edom. But the context of the good, the evil, all this that we're talking about, only is able to manifest itself and to come about, evolve, only because God created a basis for it to exist. Otherwise, it can't exist. So just as anything that exists only because it was created initially at the beginning of creation, so that you're able to have a representation of A, B, C, D, the four exiles, that is only because initially God created within existence a context of those deficiencies, which represent the counter force against whatever spirituality is. And how do you are you able to extricate yourself from that, which ultimately will come through Mashiach? That's Koach HaTshuva. And that's the Mayim. That's a representation of water. Shivchi Kamayim Libech. We find that we read in Pirkei Avos, there were a number of things created Ben Hashmoshos at the end of the sixth day, in the twilight period. One of them was Elo Shel Yitzchok, the ram of Yitzchok, the ram that was used by Avram Avinu at the time of the Akedah. The Pia Oso, the mouth of the donkey, when the donkey spoke to Bilam, when he beat it and he began speaking, that was created Ben Hashmoshos. The grave, the burial location of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is the unknown location where Moshe Rabbeinu was buried. The Pia Oretz, the mouth of the earth that swallowed up Korach and his community, because he attempted to usurp and cast doubt over the authenticity of Torah. So the Maral explains, do you mean God initially created that one ram, and the ram was put into some kind of holding location, and when Avram needed that ram, it presented itself? Is that what happened? Or the donkey? We speak the Pia also, the mouth of the donkey. What does it mean, the mouth of the donkey? So he explains, there was no ram, there was no donkey. It means that within creation, he created that reality, that whatever that ram represents, to be the equivalent of Yitzchak, to be brought as a sacrifice in this place, that within the context of creation, it existed, not in its physicality. Everything, as we've discussed many times, and the Ramchal speaks at length on this, everything in the physical is a manifestation of something in the spiritual. There are energies which God releases. Meaning the spiritual counterpart of that ram was created at the time of creation, beginning creation. When did it manifest itself? It manifested itself to be that special ram when Avram needed the ram, the mouth of the donkey to speak. That power, the spiritual entity, which ultimately will allow the donkey to speak, that was created at the beginning of creation. When it was needed, it manifested itself that donkey was able to speak. And the same thing with everything. The Pioretz. Shlomo says, we just read in Koheles, Echodesh Tachas HaShomesh. There's nothing new under the sun. Nothing new. Well, as he says, whatever was is, and whatever is will be. Echodesh Tachas HaShomesh. And the commentators explains Echodesh Tachas HaShomesh. What about L'malam HaShemesh? I mean, within the physical world, there's nothing new. Everything was put into place from the beginning of creation. Although it may have not manifested itself in the physical, but in terms of the spiritual profile infrastructure to allow it to evolve, ultimately was already from the very beginning. But L'malam HaShemesh, what's above the sun, the spiritual world, that you could have newness. Things came about that didn't pre-exist. That's the commentators. So when we speak about the Vo, which is a representation of Bovil, Vo is Haman, and Choshech is the Greeks, and Tom are the Edomites. It doesn't mean to say they existed, meaning there was a power within the spiritual realm which represented the counterforce, which will counter the existence of the Jewish people. So at the very beginning, what was the objective of creation? Bereishis bara. B'shvil Torah shenikas Bereishis. B'shvil Torah shenikas Bereishis. There was no Jewish people, but there was a representation in creation. There's a spiritual force, which when it's time for it to manifest itself, to evolve, which began with Avram Avinu, when he recognized God at the age of 3, and ultimately he was able to meet the 10 challenges, which were the Asar Nisyonos, Shenisa HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avram, and then there was a Yitzchak and a Yaakov, and Yaakov fought the angel, and so on and so forth. All of that was part of the planning from the very beginning of the counterbalance between good and evil. Otherwise, it couldn't have happened. We've once spoken about the Greeks are referred to as Choshech, Shechoshcho Eineim B'Gzeirosam. They blackened, they darkened our eyes with their decrees. And one of them was that every Jewish home had to have a plaque, had to have Keren Hashor, the horn of an ox, and they had to inscribe on it, Ein lanu chelek b'Elokei Yisrael. We have no share in the God of Israel. What is that all about? So the Maral of Prague, on his work on Hanukkah, writes, the Jewish people, we claim with the Am Hashem, we have a special relation with God. So the Greeks said, who are you fooling? You're living in a delusionary state. Why? You have a person marries a woman, and over years, the relation becomes stale. And God forbid, the woman commits adultery, or whatever it is. She's not faithful, he's not faithful. It happens. What about if the woman already committed adultery under the chuppah? What does that say about the relationship? It doesn't say there was ever much of a relationship. Because if it could happen under the chuppah, what does that say? There was never a relationship. So what they said was, if the Chet Egel would have taken place years later, it's one thing. But here, we hear Hashem speak to us. Moshe sends 40 days and 40 nights. They believe he's delayed, that he died. Where are they? They're back to idolatry. So when they said Nasiv and Nishma, it was just a momentary phase. That's all it was. It wasn't real. Because if it was real, it would have been impossible for them to cross that line and get re-involved with idolatry. Therefore, making that statement, every Jewish home should make that statement. It's stating that what you believe is baseless. That's how the Maral explains it. But of course, there's an answer to that. Because the Gemara tells us, it's a medrash, when the Egel was originally introduced, it says, Elo Elohecha Yisrael. This is the rabble presented it. The Jews did not initiate this. This was not initiated by the Jews. The Jews were pushed into it. If we would have, and to prove that point, when we speak about the 3 species that qualify for a korban, what is the first of the species that is mentioned? Shor Kesef Eis, the ox, the sheep, and the goat. Why is the first one Shor? To counter the world's claim that the original relationship was never a relationship. Because if that was the case, how is the first and foremost species the ox, which represents the egel? That tells us that the Jews themselves are not we're culpable. We shouldn't have failed, but it's not a basis to indicate that there was not a basis for a relationship. That's the Midrash. The Midrash explains it with an allegory, phenomenal allegory. The king was on a trip overseas, and word got back to him that his viceroy committed adultery with the prince, with the queen. And of course, he's upset, he's livid, comes back, launches an investigation, and he finds out it was false. He was just slandered, and there was no basis for it. So how does he vindicate the viceroy? That beyond any doubt, the viceroy is innocent. He makes a banquet for all his courtiers and all his ambassadors and all the leaders of his nation. And there's the dais. Who sits right next to the king at the dais? The viceroy. So people say it doesn't make any sense. Here the viceroy committed adultery with the queen. How does he sit right next to the king as if he's the guest of honor? This confirms that the whole thing was false. It was a baseless accusation, which is slander. Identically, Shar Kesem the A's, that the Torah, when it speaks about the species which qualify for the Korban, which have directly is the ultimate level of service of Hashem, the ox is mentioned to vindicate us that the accusation is a baseless accusation. That's the midrash. Now, so that's the moral. But I said a little different. We just read in Zosa Bracha, the bracha that Moshe had given to Yosef. What was the bracha? B'char shor hodor lo. So Rashi over there explains, an ox is the strongest animal. It's the king of the domesticated animals. It's the most powerful. V'karnei re'im karnov, but it has the beauty of the horns of a re'im, because an ox's horns are not that attractive. So he had two things: he had power and he had beauty. That was Yosef. It's referring to Yoshua, that he was able to conquer, who was a descendant of Yosef. He conquered the nations of Canaan. Now, what was Yosef? Yosef was the epitome of beauty. But what was the value of that beauty? Rachel Imenu, she was the epitome of beauty. But Chazal tell us in a number of locations, Ein zaro shel Esav nofel ela biyad zaro shel Rachel, that the progeny of Esav, in every battle we ever had with Esav, they could only fall within the hands of the descendants of Rachel. Yoshua, the first battle with Amalek was Yoshua. The first battle in Eretz Yisrael with Amalek was Shaul, was the tribe of Binyamin. The story of Purim, Mordechai and Esther, they were from Binyamin, they were from Benjamin. And Zaro shel Esav no biyad zaro shel Rachel. And the Gemara Bava Basra makes it a point. There's no battle we ever had with Amalek, with the Edomites, which the descendants of Rachel were not there. Why? So we once explained, what did Rachel represent? And we find Yosef was beyond his father. As Rashi cites the pasuk from Avadia, Beis Yaakov is Eish, Beis Yosef is Lahava, and Esav is Kash. If you remember, Rashi cites it. The house of Yaakov is fire, the house of Yosef is a flame, and the house of and Edom is straw. If you have a fire and you have straw, how do you attach the fire to the straw? If you have a flame that reaches out, the flame consumes the straw. Yosef is the Lahava. So Yosef was the equivalent of his father, but he had this other ability, the flame that is able to consume the straw, which is the Esav, which is the Edom. So that's Zaro shel Rachel. But why? What did Esav represent? Esav's representation existence was the material, was the physical, at the most extreme level. But it was physical, which had no relevance to God. When Esav heard that his grandfather passed away, when he came home and Yaakov was cooking the lentil soup, Esav said, if my grandfather, if it's a caney mess, les din v'les dayim. There's no judgment, there's no judge. That was his reaction. As a result of that, his life was material for the sake of material. Yaakov, what was his reality? It was only to facilitate the spiritual. Physical material has no value other than facilitating the spiritual. Yosef and Rachel. Rachel was the epitome of beauty. But who is Rachel? Rachel was the primary matriarch. Between Leah and Rachel, she was the primary matriarch. But what's the matriarch? She's the mother of Klal Yisrael, which is the ultimate level of spiritual. But she was the epitome of beauty. That beauty, the value was to dedicate it totally to spirituality. So she dominated the physical. Rachel dominated the physical. Yosef was Hua Mashbir. Yosef was the viceroy of Egypt. He dominated the world. He dominated the physical. That was Yosef. What were the Greeks? The Greeks worshiped beauty. But by them, the Greeks, it was beauty for the sake of beauty. Beauty itself wasn't to facilitate and to subjugate it, the spiritual to be within limitation. Therefore, they decreed, you're not permitted to circumcise yourself. Mutilating the body, removing that foreskin, is desecration of beauty. Controlling time, Shabbos. A human being is a free spirit, is an endowed spirit, creative, expansive. All of a sudden, Shabbos comes, you're limited. You can't be creative in the physical sense. Control time. Time is not yours. It's something which was actually the antithesis of what they believed. Therefore, to take the Keren Ashur, which represents Yosef, which is beauty, which is the ultimate, which was subjugated to facilitate spirituality, and write on it, Israel. That's why they chose the horn of the ox rather than any other, just put up a plaque, because it was directly addressing this issue. What is the perspective and the reality and the purpose of existence?